Right, I'm Michael Young, and this layout dates back originally to 1964, but has been moved house 3 or 4 times and extended extemporary to fit the accommodation available in every move. But it has been here for the past 20 years, and before that it was 18 years in Leicestershire in Market Bosworth. Prior to that, it was in Warwickshire for about 5 years, and most of the main station buildings originate from 1964, so give you some idea of the age of the whole thing. It started off basically as memories of places I have been to. Originally I was living near to RAF Cosford in Shropshire, and I started building it in the bedroom, but we moved from there within about 2 or 3 years, so it never got very advanced. There are some early photographs of it, but the buildings, I have never done away with any of them. They've always remained unused on the layout. For example, the engine shed in the right hand corner is on the site of what was once the former dairy, and the top of the layout on the other end of the garage you can see the remains of the narrow gauge cutting where the narrow gauge rower used to run to a terminus where the workbench now is. So the narrow gauge rower is now being relocated to the back of the wall of this garage and rebuilt, but it's still running the same stock as it always had. And I had to put in 2 crossovers where the narrow gauge crosses over the main line. Originally I went to school here in North Walsham, and my mother was a rural headmistress at one of the small rural village schools in Norfolk, and I used to come here by train quite often. If the school bus, you needed to stay later than the school bus, for instance, and so a lot of the Eastern region influence I've got here stems from that time, because they're models of the engines that used to haul me in childhood to and from school, and that was a convoluted journey because you had to go from a rural station where I used to leave my bicycle for 1 and 6pence a day in safe accommodation, and about a 15-mile journey to here, and here we are. I'm 50 years plus later. You're living in the place only about 200 yards from where I went to school. In 1958, my mother got a major appointment from a tiny village school to becoming firstly deputy of a 1,200 pupil girls' school, which suited me fine, and then that was in the suburbs of Birmingham, and so I had 2 very happy years living in Birmingham before, well, outside Birmingham, actually 10 miles out, in a place called Coleshill, which has now been ruined by motorways. But after being in Birmingham for 2 years, where I did my A-levels, so I went on then to study engineering at Sheffield University, and there I met my wife, and I spent 5 years living and working in Sheffield. So that tends to give me an Eastern region bias as well. But my real love is still the Great Western and the West Country, hence the name of the rail, which is Trewolda, which was an actual place we stayed at one stage, not far from Padstow in Cornwall. And we were there at the time the Wenford Bridge branch was still working, though diesel hauled, unfortunately, at that stage. And most of the infrastructure was still intact of the Withered Arm, which unfortunately has since disappeared. So I've got photographs of Weybridge and places like that when they were still in operation. And that did inspire me to model the West Country, hence the reason you'll see on this layout there is a mix of southern region, western area, and Great Western stock of around that era. Some of it a bit earlier and some of it a bit later. But originally I set the date as about round circa 1959, because the first engines I got were Castles, actually, Hornby 00 ones, and they've still got it somewhere on the shelf behind me here. No longer the best runner, but it still looks presentable, and Hornby 00 models generally are presentable, but not very powerful by today's standards. So, as I say, it was basically a holiday in North Cornwall that inspired me to name the layout. Well, interest in railways, I suppose it really started during the war, when I was about 4. I was actually born in Ireland, but came back to live in southeast London during the wartime years. Not quite the safest place to be brought back to, but still. But we had relatives in Wales and in Scotland. So one of my earliest memories is a journey up to Scotland behind a very large black streamlined Coronation Pacific, and they put me to sleep up on the rack, so it gives you an idea of how small I was. And at about 4 o'clock in the morning the train did an emergency stop, and you don't stay on the rack when the train does an emergency stop, you roll off onto the floor. But I was padded in army greatcoat, so I didn't sustain any damage. But that must have been just before the end of the war, because I remember VE Day on the Clyde at Gourock, where I saw my first ever photographs, if I hadn't seen enough hellfire down in southeast London. So yes, I suppose that gave me a love of railways, because I really enjoyed travelling on the Anglo-Scottish Express and the local suburban trains in the Glasgow area. I don't remember too much about the detail of it. And then when it came to North Walsham, of course, it was still very much Midland and Great Northern Territory. I mean, we still had Somersault signals at the station, and it was a busier line than the branch from Norwich to Cromer, for example. It was where the main traffic was, and at lunch times we used to go and sit on the fence between the two railway lines. One of the big experiences I remember there was a freight train came from Aylsham direction to North Walsham and was going on straight down to Great Yarmouth, because there was a lot of fish traffic and stuff like that. But it got to the rise coming up into North Walsham Town Station, which was the M&GN station, next to the Great Eastern one, and right beside where we were sitting, one of the couplings snapped, and the rear of the train started to roll back down the grade towards Aylsham. Meanwhile, the first half of the train went on round the corner till they must have stopped it somehow, or the driver realised that he'd lost half his train, and it came very slowly back in reverse direction, and they recoupled it, and it carried on to Yarmouth after that. But that was quite an exciting experience to watch. I've never seen a train split like that before. It was basically because it came onto the rising grade into what's the town station, which has now been flattened and is now the bypass for the town. But it was quite a rise up to reach the level of the railway, which was at the same level as the Great Eastern one across the road. So there were two bridges and a constantly falling gradient of the main road, whereas it now goes under, where it went under two bridges, it now goes under one bridge and then goes up in a hump where the railway used to be. Yes, and you never see that again, but you can go down to Honing Station where they're busily rebuilding it, which is quite interesting because I've got photographs of that taken in '59 when I went on what was supposed to be a final day trip, final day tour of the Midland Great Northern System, and I've still got the ticket that says London King's Cross to London Liverpool Street via Yarmouth Beach, and we had about 2 happy hours in Yarmouth Beach where I recreated myself with my former school friends. But yes, it's a great loss, the Midland Great Northern System. It was excellently engineered, and one of the other things we used to do was, I don't know, the drivers used to be supporting, but if you got on the school train going home down to Salhouse, the Great Eastern Main Line is on a rising grade as it leaves North Walsham. Not a very steep one, but steep enough. But the Midland and Great Northern falls away at about 1 in 80 down to Honing. And they used to start the 2 trains off from the 2 stations, which were quite a distance apart, and then race each other to the high point of the line. But the Midland Great Northern one always won because it was on a downgrade and we were on an upgrade, and it used to be quite exciting, you know, where the children going in the Yarmouth direction going to beat us to the top of the hill. So that was one of the exciting things. But not a lot else immediate memories, because, as I say, in 1958 we moved to Birmingham, and that really whetted my Great Western appetite, because Snow Hill became my home. Every 5 minutes I wasn't doing something else, I was on Snow Hill Station, and my photographic collection of Snow Hill is quite extensive, to say the least. Though I didn't have an expensive camera in those days, but still managed to get some good ones. I've never been disinterested in diesels, as you can see from the shelf behind you. There's a shelf of them, and they were the upcoming technology. When I was at school in Birmingham, we were right beside the London to Birmingham Railway, and every lunchtime at 1 o'clock, it was the 1 o'clock train out of New Street to London, was always hauled by one of the twin diesels of the LMS, so I find it unbelievable now. Because it was a diesel, I used to try and ride it to my relatives in Northampton, because it went via the Northampton loop, and so I used to go down behind 10,001 was the usual engine, and I think we had 10,000 once or twice, but 10,001 was the more common one. So again, I've got a model of that. You know, this is how my collection has grown, because I had to have a model of 10,001 on. But I used to cycle over to Tamworth on the London North Western Main Line up to Crewe, and that we used to gather in a field, the local spotters, and we used to go under the bridge if it was a wet day, and we used to light fires under there to keep warm in winter, because they usually got dripping wet on cycling there, because I was 12 miles from Tamworth, and my bicycle was the only means of transport. There was no buses or anything that you used to get there, but yes, it's that's where I got a love of the London North Western Main Line and the expresses, because we had the bullied diesels there, 10201, 10202, which always operated as a pair, because they were only 1600 horsepower, but 10203, which was 2000 horsepower, and almost identical mechanically to the more recent Class 40s, same bogies and everything. And that used to be impressive because they used to tend to work the Royal Scot north and southbound with that, and according to what day you went, you get 10203 heading south or north, and 10201 and 10202 heading in the other direction. So all the the early diesels I was very familiar with and fascinated by, because they were so different to anything that we got otherwise. And then of course there are some times I wish I hadn't, because you know they disappeared very quickly, and by the time I'd spent 5 years in Sheffield, it came back to a totally different scene, and it had been taken over by Class 40s and Class 20 Class 20 diesels on freight and that sort of thing, pretty much the same as, well, not too much the same or different from as it is now. And so I've never been anti-diesel, but I always have been pro-steam. And in latter years my parents moved to the station house at Whittaker, which is on the Birmingham Derby Junction Railway, that as was, and Whittaker Junction and the waterworks, where my grandfather used to be the chief engineer, next door, and they retired theirs, and suddenly I found I got my parents living in a house by a main railway junction where the Leicester line came in to join the Birmingham Derby and carry on into New Street. And we've got some very interesting shots there. Flying Scotsman, for instance, away from the main publicity areas, because I've got it going through the main station, but used to go occasionally up into the box as well, because that was still manned. And I've got pictures of the last trains out of Whittaker Junction late at night, because I could, and that was interesting to say the least. It's all just a flat junction now, with my parents' former house still there, but they retired to Norfolk from there, so hence the reason why I came back in this area, because it was easier than travelling 135 miles to come and see them. And here I am to this day. No, my original layout was a Trintrix one, manufactured by Bassett Loke in Northampton. And again, because of my family connections in Northampton, it was easy to get to the factory for spares and things like that. And I'm pretty certain that when they said they've repaired your loco, what you got was a new loco rather than the repaired one, because they were mint. I used to love going to their showroom as well in Northampton. It was incredible. I always dreamed of Bassett loco gauge layout, but unaffordable even in those days. When we moved from Norfolk to come back to Birmingham, initially we lived with my grandparents, who also lived in Coleshill, but had a very large Victorian terrace house with an upstairs loft, and I put my railway in up there, more or less, and at that point I began to convert to two rail, because I laid it out so that the Trintrix engines could run so far, halfway around the loft, and then beyond that it was two rail, so that they couldn't manage on that, so the train had to be handed over. So I had a loco exchange, if you like, and that probably only lasted, I suppose it lasted a couple of years. We were in Birmingham before we went to Sheffield, and the Trintrix was a good system actually, because you could run 2 trains on one track with 2 controllers in theory, because the centre rail was common return, but each outside row could be controlled separately, so you could have 2 trains on the same track. And it worked quite well. I've still got the controllers and I've still got the engines, but they're a bit tired, and because they're probably pre-war in origin, except the ones I had repaired at Bassett Lokes. And my grandchildren used to call the thing Old Sparky when I put it out on the table, because it goes along with great sparks flashing out from its shoes, which wear out unbelievably rapidly, and I used to fill them with solder to keep it going. And solder is not the best material for hard wearing, but yes. And then I managed to get, in my grandparents' loft, I bought my first Hornby 002 rail engine at Castle, which is somewhere on the shelf behind you still.
You said that,
and still running. I then bought one of their small R1 060 tank engines, which they did with a plastic body. That was when they were beginning to start to try and compete with Triang, I think. And again, that's on the shelf somewhere. It's still running. So much so I bought another one. So I've got 2 of those somewhere, mixed in with all the engines. But I really need to be able to sort those engines out, because I'm not even aware of what I've got there. Funny enough, the ones that still go are the old Hornby 00 ones. They seem to be indestructible. That's where I started, and if you look on the shelf up there, I've still got quite a bit of Hornby 00 stuff stored. It does get brought down, but it's not a patch on modern bodied stuff from Mainline and from Bachmann and others. So, and the Bachmann stuff is incredible. I mean, I've been buying that ever since it first came out.
Yeah. So you say the Castle's your oldest one. What's your most modern?
Most modern one is this T9 here.
One, yes, I don't know, yeah.
Fortunately, when I went to Sheffield, I was looking for holiday jobs, which, as you do, and I went as a platform as a leading porter on the railway. A leading porter because I was handling finance, because I could, and so we used to do the paychecks for everybody on the station and things like that. But most of it was sweeping the platforms, cleaning the signal box windows, which is a job I really enjoy because it came with free tea and coffee and company, and it was always warm in the signal boxes. Because Sheffield had 3, that had I'm not sure, no, it had 4. There were 2 central boxes, and there was 1 north and south ends. And so rather than, when I was first in Sheffield Victoria was the one that fascinated me, the Great Central Station. And I used to go and visit I used to go over to Crewe actually, and visit my relatives in Stoke-on-Trent using the Woodhead line. And that was exciting because 70 miles an hour around bends, which you thought were totally unsafe for that sort of speed, but suddenly you realised the train was canted because all the poles were leaning out as you went round the bends. But that was, I don't think they should have ever got rid of that. It was a brilliant line. And the fact you can get from Sheffield to Manchester at steady 70 mile an hour was ridiculous, you know, compared with wandering along the Pretty Hope Valley route, which I became familiar with also. But that's another story. But working on Sheffield Midland Station rather than the Sheffield Victoria, which I fancied more, I found I was called upon every year, are you available this holiday season? So after that I did 3 sessions or 3 years of holiday relief on Sheffield Midland Station, keeping my grade as a leading porter, which was quite useful. And to give a scale of why I was doing it, as a student I was earning over £40 a week if I did night duty, and when I qualified as a fully qualified engineer I was getting £8 15 shillings a week. So you know, it was really worth putting the effort in, and I used to enjoy it actually, but I got 1 or 2 perks as well, because I had a very friendly platform inspector who was in charge of our side of the station, and call him a platform inspector, I suppose he was station superintendent, but I used to go back to my parents down in Coleshill in Birmingham, and I was going back, I'd been on late duty and I was going to go catch the train back, and he suddenly said, do you want to ride the engine back? So I was fortunate in the Newcastle Exeter Mail. I got into the cab, I was told, I'd still got my railway uniform on, so I was told to explain to anybody that I was learning the route, and I went all the way back to Tamworth on the footplate of D55, which was one of the peak diesels, and it was a beautiful moonlight night and you could see the rails shining ahead of you, and the second man took me back into the rear cab, and that was the experience as well, because you could see the whole train curving behind you in the moonlight, and going past the engine, mind you, was another experience. Of 120 degrees in the engine room, and the noise, you could hardly hear yourself think, let alone speak. But you went into the cab and shut the door, and it just went silent, and all you could hear was these 8-wheel bogies going vroom, vroom, vroom on the track. And yes, the other perks I got was putting the stock of what they called the London Express that arrived in about 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Would you like to take it up to Healy carriage sidings? Well, the station pilot was a B1, so we used to take the London Express on the B1 backwards up to Healy sidings, which was about 2 or 3 miles up the line on the 1 in 100 grade out of Sheffield station, and then come back light engine at about 50 or 60 miles an hour, which was quite exhilarating, and then sort of just park it up in the station to carry on its duties as station pilot. But there were perks to that job, but equally there were downsides, like cleaning the public toilets for a start. But you took the rough with the smooth, and after 4 weeks you got privileged travel each year, You had to work the first 4 weeks before you got privileged travel. But that led to even more adventures, because by then I was going out with my fiancée regularly, and she was a nurse at one of the university hospitals in Sheffield. And we used to go out into the Hope Valley, which is why I won't downgrade the Hope Valley as a route, because we used to go to places like Castleton and Edale, and from there you've got Kinder Scout, for instance, and things like that. And we both like walking, which we quite often walk from Castleton to Edale across the bridge, and Loose Hill and places like that that are now much more popular than they were then, I suppose. But anyway, one night we got back to Grindleford station, and I got my privilege pass, and I had to pay full fare for my fiancée, as she was then, and the chap said, "Oh, I'll give you for privilege if you go and put the lights on in the station." Well, of course, they were all gas lamps, so we had to go round the whole of Grindleford station pulling these gas lamps on, which is quite enjoyable actually. And then, of course, you get the 3-mile journey through Dore and Totley Tunnel, or Totley Tunnel, on to Totley Moor, and yes, it was. I thoroughly enjoyed my time on the railway. So much so, I actually lost the job I was going to when I left university, because I rang them up and said I'm now available to come because I'd finished my turn on the railway. And they said, "Oh, sorry, you can't." So I literally had to get on my bike and go around Birmingham looking for work. Though I didn't do too badly, and I played the big building contractors off against each other. So I finished up working for Sir Alfred McAlpine, who then gave me the job of building the railway track at Ironbridge Power Station, which they're now busily dismantling, of course. But that was equally exciting, because we got Manor class steam locos bringing in coal trains. They were in run-down condition, and a Foxcote Manor was one of those, which is now on the Severn Valley, I think it is, or is it the Gloucester and Warwickshire? I'm not sure, but anyway, the Foxcote Manor was one of our regulars, but equally the original Ironbridge Power Station, Ironbridge A as they were calling it then, had a little Packet 040, which was doing all the local shunting of the old 4-wheel wagons, whereas I was laying out a line for merry-go-round hoppers and building along the formation of the Severn Valley, but about 12 feet higher than the original railway. It was the site of Biltmore Junction where the line went off to Much Wenlock, and that was an experience again, because you could walk. We walked up the Much Wenlock branch, which was probably only closed about 2 or 3 years before, but halfway up there was a military depot where they'd left all the railway track work in place, including the junction onto what was the branch line, and it was maintained immaculately. Even the rails were clean, and all the well, it was the usual army stuff. If it doesn't move, paint it white. And but I had some rather interesting life on that, you know, because my track work, which was new, and I've still got the photographs of it, had to take a 350-ton boiler, which was the largest load then carried by British Railways anywhere, and they left the old section of the Severn Valley Railway line from Shrewsbury down to Ironbridge in place to bring this boiler in. And much to my consternation, they decided they were going to run it in over the outside of my 3 tracks, so that was the one nearest the edge of the embankment. And we'd had 1 or 2 interesting stories there, because initially we used local rock that we dug out and tried to build an embankment. But about 3 weeks after we'd built it, you could bounce on it like a spring mattress. It was mudstone, and it disintegrates. It's solid when you dig it out, but it disintegrates once it's exposed to air. So we had to replace the whole lot with limestone brought in from Much Wenlock, and that brought even more interest in paleontology, if you like, because they were digging it out from the Wenlock edge, and one of the big Amorite fossils tipped out the back of a lorry, and I gave it to my mother, who was, as I said earlier, was a schoolmistress, and it was spotted by Birmingham Museums at the school, and they said could they have it, so that's where it is now. So it was dug out of Much Wenlock area, or the Wenlock edge, and discovered in Armbridge as part of the railway ballast. It was too good to just crush up, and so there it is to this day in Birmingham Museum. Well, I hope so anyway. I haven't been to Birmingham Museum for about 30 years, but then nobody's told me they've got rid of it.